Okay, good morning, everybody. Peter James is my name from Career Life Transitions. We have three people on the call this morning, Alice, Chantal, and Steve. I hope you're all well. Thanks for joining us this morning to be talking about change and transformation in organisations. I'm flying solo this morning. Charlene has taken off to Rottnest for a couple of days with the family over the school holidays. And so I'm hoping the weather gets a bit better for her to be nice, cold and windy at Rottnest on a day like today. Anyway, we're talking about change management, change and transformation. I guess having worked in this field for 25 years, I've kind of developed some fairly solid views as to what it is and what it isn't, and the role of the various stakeholders in the organization, whether it's the HR department, the leaders in the organization, management, and the workforce, and whoever is driving that change within the business. So I'm going to walk through, I guess, my experience of change management and my views on what makes good change management, what makes change fail. Statistically, change does fail an awful lot more than it succeeds, unfortunately. But we have a chat room there. If you have any questions that we go through, please just drop them into the chat room. We're running for about 35 minutes. And at the end of that, if you have any further questions or anything, we can certainly answer that as we move along. I noticed on our request out there about anything specific, there wasn't anything that people necessarily wanted to cover off on. So I'm assuming everyone can see my my slides. So in the session, we're talking about what questions should you be asking about change if you're going to embark on any kind of change within your organization. And I mean, there are multiple changes that can occur into organization. I mean, you have a technological change, which I guess where in the early days where I was most involved in, where you're installing computers into an organization or changing the system or changing the process. Then when you're talking about some of the larger organizations like SAP, they're actually now asking you to change the way you do work to suit the computer program because it's way too expensive to do it the other way around. But there are some key questions you should be asking about the change. We want to look at why change fails. We want to have a look at what a good change process should look like. And how do we approach change in a way that engenders success and sustainabilities? And what could be your next step if you're in the middle or about to embark on a change or even coming to the end of the change? And I guess one thing is absolutely certain these days, whereas if you went back 5, 10, 20 years ago, there was a lot more stability in business than there is now. So you would make a change that could take 2 or 3 years. You'd set it in place, you'd roll out the computer system or the upgrade and what have you, and that was all reasonably stable. These days, everything is moving so fast. There is so much technology dropping on our doorstep. I was listening to a fellow talk about drone technology yesterday morning at Rotary, and I mean the acceleration of that technology into every aspect of what we do is just unbelievable, and it will continue. I mean the growth projections over the next 10 years just in drones alone is in the 6,000% increase in that technology. So to be able to sort of sit down and say, right, I want to put in a change program to do this or that over the next 5 years, well, there will be so many external factors that are rolling into that it's hard to imagine that would roll out smoothly. So just hitting the button there. So I guess there are different, and I want to just go through a couple of definitions. There are, I guess, different approaches. There is organization development, and I notice a lot of organizations now employ an organization development specialist in the organization because it is an effort to continually improve an organization's capability, and that's through alignment of all the aspects within a business. Organization development isn't just about training of people. Everything needs to align. If I'm growing my business, I'm in growth mode or I'm in acquisition mode, I need to be looking at strategy, structure, reward system, metrics, management processes, policies, procedures. So it is a scientific-based interdisciplinary field that looks at a whole range of interactions that improves the capacity of that business to meet the marketplace. And ultimately, that's what we're all trying to achieve, to ensure that we provide a service, product and service to our market that meets the needs of the marketplace. And as our business grows, that we continue to innovate and be also growing in our capability to continue to deliver those services. Change management, on the other hand, is a systematic approach to dealing with a transitional transformation of organizations, goal, process, and technologies. So I guess the change management, there is a lot of technical aspects to it, and certainly my early days in change management were around the technical aspects of making that change. So the training and development is required, stakeholder management that was required, the policies and processes that needed to change, and the actual change in the technology or the change in the process itself. And I guess there was a tacit acknowledgement of management and leadership, but people seem to turn their back on that reasonably quickly. Certainly, some of you may remember we had a whole initiative came out. I'm thinking now back to the late 90s, early 2000s, it was called. It was called, I just jumped out of my head for a second, benefits realization. And benefits realization, we rolled that on a very large project I was working on at the time. We had a number of consultants, and it was something that had taken off almost worldwide at that particular time. But what it actually we mapped as part of benefits realization was the commitment of the organization's management and leadership to ensure that the change occurred. And it's kind of really interesting that it was quite difficult to engage leadership and management in that process. So in other words, if I wanted this change, or I wanted the people who were reporting to me to do something differently, I needed to commit myself to do something differently. And I just found that kind of really interesting, that I haven't heard that term benefits realization for a while, and I haven't seen that that kind of initiative, but it certainly has occurred to me that the change, and where we move on to that transformation, the change in a lot of the processes and what have you are driven by the way someone is thinking about it and their willingness to engage in that. So we move on to transformation. To that, the definition of that is to change completely the appearance or character of something or someone so that that thing or person is improved. So I guess change has moved from what we saw as a bit of a process of changing from A to B, to the recognition that if I don't have the people on board and engaged, then rolling out a new program does not mean I'm going to receive the benefit of that. And then that leads on to leadership, where we are now saying, well, if change needs to occur, then the leaders are the first ones that need to change. They're not directing the change for other people to make. And I know certainly in the US, and I haven't seen it here yet, but the US, there are a couple of major change organizations who won't even start a major change initiative with the organization unless they spend 6 months with a senior executive training and developing them to lead the change. Because the facts of the matter are most change initiatives fail because leadership hasn't really stepped up to drive that change. So the key questions I'm always asking myself when we move into any kind of change initiative is, what outcome do I want from this? And sometimes the outcomes are a little unclear. I remember working with an organization once that they just wanted the latest technology. So that almost, it doesn't become an outcome they're looking for. It's almost like a process. They weren't looking for what the latest technology would give them or how it would improve their business. In fact, an analysis, a benefits realization analysis of that said they weren't actually going to get any kind of benefit technically to or financially to the organization at all, but they just wanted the latest technology. So, I mean, if that is the case, then you're going to find it difficult to get people involved and engaged in it, because it becomes quite complex very, very quickly if people can't see what's in it for them and a purpose for the change. The next thing is, what has to be different to achieve those or that outcome? And if it's a technical change, it's always going to be a socio-technical change. You can't just have a technical change remote from people unless you're putting robots in. But even then, you're going to need to have people program the robots, do the repairs and whatever. So you can never separate people's involvement in any kind of change process you're rolling out in an organization. But I mean, really sort of sitting down and saying, okay, well, let's map what actually has to change and being very pragmatic about it right across the business if we want to achieve that outcome. Next question is, how complex is a change? What is the current gap? I mean, sometimes that change process can be quite simple, and when we map through and have a look at what actually needs to change and occur, it doesn't become complicated. But if you've found yourself an organization that you've let go to the point where you think you need a massive cultural change, well, I mean, a couple of questions come to mind straight away for that. How did you let it get to that point in the first place? But secondly, a cultural change requires a lot of different thinking in the leadership team and with the people, because a cultural change is a combination of the thinking of everybody in that group. So if I'm not able to go and influence the way they're thinking about the organization, that's going to find it quite difficult to make that cultural change they're looking for, because they were the culture they are to start off with. And to say you need to be different in the future is going to require some very, very strong leadership and some very hard decisions. One of the other questions, I mean, it's such a dynamic environment, how much time do we have? And I spoke about earlier about maybe having 2-3 years to try and make these changes, but these days the environment is changing so quickly and so rapidly, and the opportunities are so readily available that you really want to be biting off what you can handle within the context of what you have. I mean, organizations that are rolling out large changes are really starting to stall in the middle of that. If they're not managing that balance of people and technology, people will start to leave the organization. The change can be skewed. New technologies come in, would make some of the work that's being done irrelevant. It's really now not a matter of long-term change initiatives. It's more long-term objectives and goals for the organization, and then seeing how you can break that up into bite-sized chunks that you can manage, given the time resources that you have to manage that. One of the other questions is, how much productivity am I prepared to sacrifice? And that has a lot to do with how much time and effort you want to put into the change. If I want to change my processes and I don't want to invest up front in that, then when you get people, and we'll talk about some of the symptoms that occur in organizations when change is not handled well, when people start to check out of that process and what have you, you will suffer productivity. So people sort of say, well, how much does it cost to run a change program? Well, it costs a heck of a lot less to do the planning and work up front than it does to try and fix things at the end. And I've seen some organizations that go through changes and they fail and then try and revisit again and they fail, and they pretty much have people checking out of that. So change will cost you. Change does require that investment. It's difficult, I guess, when it becomes a non-tangible event at the front end. When you're talking to the finance director, you're talking to those that are providing the funds and resources to it, and say, look, we really need to invest in leadership development, people development up front, so that we can save a lot of money down the end. The financial team will look at that, run the numbers and what have you, and say, well, no, well, this is our investment. And I've seen change programs go through where they're trying to roll out technology. Really 98% of the investment of the whole change has gone into the technology itself, and 2% is left over to do any kind of training development, stakeholder engagement, and actually engaging people in that change. They tend not to work all that well, because ultimately the choice of whether I effectively use new technology or follow a new process or a new way of doing things is based on the way I'm thinking about my engagement with the organization, not whether that exists or not. And I remember working with one of the big mining companies years ago where they rolled out a program that was meant to remove Excel spreadsheets from the organization. And in the end, it actually just created double the amount of work, because people didn't trust the new system. So they ran their existing Excel programs in parallel so they could cross-check to see whether the information was accurate. Now that what was supposed to be a time-saving and cost-effective initiative of the organization actually turned into a cost sink for the organization and a reduction in productivity. It's important to look at your budget. You do need to spend money on change. And I guess up front, it looks like a capital expense that's quantified, qualified right up front. A lot of people are organizations are fooling themselves by saying, well, we'll just deal and mop up with the end. It'll cost what it costs us, because it's not as obvious. It's not as, it doesn't sit on the spreadsheet in terms of the profit and loss, which is a false economy in the end. I tend to find mopping up change processes at the end much more costly in terms of productivity for the organization and effort than if some good planning had gone in up front. And as I said before, that real and tangible support from the top is absolutely essential. We're seeing that more and more, that leaders have a much greater impact on the organization, the direction of the culture of the organization, than a lot of them believe they do. And if you're looking at some organizations where a change is required, unless it's getting full support from the senior leaders in the organization, and they know how to interact and lead change, which is a subtle difference to managing an organization, then they're not likely to get the results they were trying to achieve out of that. I mean, change is not something that should be left to the HR department or a component of the department of the HR department. It's not something that should be delegated to lower levels in the organization. If it's not championed and led from the top, then it is at risk of failing to achieve the goals. So negatives and change are why. I mean, basically, the answer there is there are massive amounts of change going on around the place all the time. And I mean, there's such a large number of changes through technology and what have you being introduced almost on a weekly basis at the moment, that a lot of organizations, I guess we look at senior management in an organization, we say, well, they must have the ultimate level of competency and capability to make the best decisions that they can. Well, even if that is true and they're making the best decisions they can at that particular time, I don't know what's coming around the corner, and neither do them. Neither do they, sorry. So, I mean, looking at that senior management team, they really need to be across where they're going, what the change is looking like, and being aware that they need to be intimately involved in that, because it is changing so quickly that they cannot, I guess, deploy that or pass that responsibility onto to people in the workplace, because it's just too complex. And making decisions and what have you, and expecting people in the organization just to try and mop up those decisions, given they may have been made under fast or under information that wasn't current or relevant at the time, is unreasonable. We are starting to be organisms in organizations that really need to be working together and a lot closer than they have in the past. It's no longer management dishing instructions down to the employees. Now we need to be creating those environments where there is open and honest and complete communication across, so that people are aware of being able to make the right decisions from the right information from the shop floor all the way through. So, once again, organizations are going through a lot of change initiatives that organizations are expecting just through the event of technology and economies. And I mean, we had no way of predicting COVID going back 2 years ago. I mean, the marketplace is now driven by opinions and views, not by facts and information. So there is so much going on around the place that it is a chaotic environment of which organizations are trying to survive and be the best they can with what they have. But everyone knows that change is constant, whereas previously we may have set aside some time to sort of say, we are going to put this change initiative in, it starts here, it finishes there. I think we've come to the conclusion that certainly the whole advent of agile workforces and that agility, that change is constantly occurring, and I need to be developing, engaging a workforce that is accepting of that. I mean, I remember, as I said, working with organizations, the change wasn't planned well up front. As that whatever that technology rolled out, the workforce are resisting it. It causes massive issues for the organization, both in terms of engagement of employees, productivity, and its ability to meet the marketplace. And you can't live in that state for very long, because there is another organization globally or locally or nationally that is around the corner. They're ready to steal your marketplace at a moment's notice. And with my ability now to jump on my phone, jump on my computer, and very, very quickly almost assess any organization around the place in terms of how the employees feel about working there, what the culture is looking like, what the return of investment and success of that organization is. That information is starting to become more and more readily available. So from my seat, I can get in and evaluate how organizations are going and make decisions as to what organization I want to deal with, even down to the local coffee shop. So change is unsuccessful, as I said before, because we fail to realize the full complexity of change in the part of the organization, the focus on the process, and don't take into account the individual employees, that unique dynamic to any organizational change. So we miss the imperative to support employees' unique needs as they occur inside the change experience themselves. So most change fails because management and leadership weren't fully on board with what it was. You end up with this certain fracture where even though the management team may say, yes, we're on board with it, as they're set up in a context where they're competing with each other, and FIFA said management is a fight for scarce resources, that they start to play that zero-sum game. In other words, if I win, you lose, or if you win, I lose. But what gets lost out of that is the uniqueness of the individual that is subject to that change and how they're feeling about that. So when management leadership fails to recognize the impact that the individuals have in the organization from leadership all the way through to the floor, then you are setting yourself on a road that may not lead to a successful transformation, or certainly you'll get a suboptimal result from that. So some of you may have seen the integral model. The integral model really talks about the balance, the being and the doing, how we act, how we think. We're very, very comfortable on that right-hand side around the actions, competency, skills, training, decisions. They're very tangible, measurable. When we look at the systems in the organization, the resources, procedures, policies, information, metrics, that type of thing, because they're quite tangible, we're very, very comfortable to sit in there and evaluate, measure, understand, and make decisions on the basis of that. Where we in change really need to be looking at is the left-hand side of that, and that's about how and what we think. Our beliefs, our values, the attitude, commitment, empowerment, and those things are very, very much shaped by the culture of the organization, the values of the organization, which is led by leadership. And I mean, where I see cultures misaligned or values misaligned and what have you, I see leadership that is not holding people to account, that is not explaining exactly what the goals they're trying to achieve, where they're trying to go, and it can end up with this situation where everyone's trying to do the best thing they can, but there is no real direction or leadership. And I guess where you have management leadership coming up through the ranks, where their profession sits around their technological capability, whether it's teachers or engineers or things like that, and then you drop them into a role where you're asking them to be leaders. If they're not developed in these ways of understanding people and human interactions, then they're leaving themselves open to making errors. And there you have your shared values, your shared perceptions, norms, fairness, ethics, and morals within the organization. They really start to shape an organization that is flexible and willing to make the necessary changes almost on a continuous basis, because change now is almost a continuous process. So there is attachment theory. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but basically people are attached to the way things occur in organizations. So when you're going back and having a look at change and people in the organization, recognizing that people have attached themselves to the view out their window, their desk, the group they're sitting on, their coffee station, the get-togethers, or whatever it is that makes them feel comfortable about being in that workplace. I mean, when I ask people about why they've worked at an organization for a long time, the list of things sit around culture and values and their friends and their challenges and the work they're able to do in that environment. When I create change, then I create the potential for a loss of that attachment. And when I do that, I mean, some of these things are quite deep-seated. I mean, I've worked with organizations that have merged, two organizations merged 15 years ago, and they still refer to each other in the company that basically hasn't existed for 15 years, and there are still silos between those. So not paying attention to that creates ongoing issues moving forward. And that's why I was talking about this mop up after a change that's not done well can be very time consuming and very expensive. So the models of motivation I like to look at is Daniel Pink's, and he's talking about that autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Now, if we don't do change well and don't take into account leadership and the thought processes of the people that are involved in that change, we take away their autonomy, their ability to make decisions. We take away, if they had mastery in certain processes and ways of doing things in the business, if we change, we put them at risk. So they feel like there is a loss of mastery, and that sense of mastery is one of the key motivators in the workplace. And if I'm not clear about what that change is for and what we're trying to achieve as a result of that, then I start to remove the purpose for that. So when change is done poorly, we are potentially damaging what actually motivates people in Daniel Pink's motivational theory, the autonomy, mastery, and purpose. One of the other models I like to look at is David Rock's SCARF model. And really, it is a model that is almost a little bit of a checklist of the yin and yang of this. If I can start to assess what the change is impacting in terms of people's relatedness to it, then I can positively influence that. If I ignore that, then I'm going to have a negative impact on that. So I'm changing the structure of the organization. I've got to recognize that for some people, I'm changing their status in the organization, and that may be a red flag to them. Some people are very, very keen on change, constant change, and are happy in that environment, but some people are not. Some people really want some clear direction, some certainty as to what their role looks like from one day to the next. And not recognizing that puts people under stress, that people want some autonomy. Now, we are very happy generally with change when we're involved in that and have some input to it. We're making changes to our personal lives constantly and all the time, and we accept that. When we're told to change, it takes away that sense of autonomy, and it takes away our willingness to get involved in that. In change and organization, our relatedness to the organization and to each other can be damaged as well. And for some people, that's important, and that's something you may want to look at. And then there's the fairness side of it. If someone's looking at a change in organization and seeing that someone else is getting more than they're getting out of it, it's likely to accelerate their discontent in the organization. And I guess this is where we move from the whole role of what is a manager in an organization and what to a leader in an organization. The manager in the organization, there are a lot of good managers out there, and that's policies, procedures, KPIs, goals, outcomes, all that kind of thing. What you can measure in terms of project managing a process of some way, that falls in the management camp. Once I start to move into leadership, then I'm doing all that as well as developing a relationship. And I think as we've flattened structures in organizations, and I mean, when I first went to uni and was talking about management, they were talking about reporting structures of no more than 7 to 9 people. In other words, as a manager, I don't only have 7 to 9 people. I'm talking to managers now that have 30 people that are reporting into them. So their ability to develop a relationship with those individuals, to understand a little bit about them. I'm not talking about doing a psychoanalysis of them, but if you have people that are working for you, like a football coach understands what strings to pull, what's important to each of the individuals, so they can provide that to them. So when change is done poorly, these are the things that are impacted. Just keeping an eye on the time. So the challenge, therefore, is how do we move people from one mindset to another without destabilizing the business? So what does good change look like? Well, I always like the Danny Miller approach. Starting off with a very, very clear vision as to where you want to go and explaining the dissatisfaction with the current state, putting your first steps and plans in place need to be greater than the resistance you're expecting from the organization. So it's a very, very simple formula, but it gives you some guidelines as to how your communications should set. What should I be investigating? What should I be measuring? What should I be looking at? So running through this change formula, I guess, starts off with your model of how I should be looking at change. There are symptoms of change and strategies to address. So when change isn't done well, the individual symptoms that start to float up are anxiety, frustration, a refusal to get involved in developing, so it's retardation, development, rejection of the environment, refusal to participate, and withdrawal. And you'll notice the mitigation strategy, the intervention strategy on the right-hand side are all around behavioral interactions a business can have: increased support and leadership, increased education, individual coaching, improved communications, evaluating employee engagement and support, monitoring job satisfaction. So we are constantly going back and having a look at how people are interacting with that change. And a lot of that will be impacted by the interaction with the leadership in the change. So team and leadership matters. We need to be developing leaders so they are sitting on the right-hand side of that. That required future mindset for the leaders of change is: I'm leading the change, I'm needed to be involved, I'm responsible for and contributing to this, the success is up to us, and I'm an alloy that makes the wheel. Rather than that change is happening to me, it's been forced, I don't want to engage in this, it's too hard, we've done it before, it'll go past. These, I guess, are the self-protection responses to the triggers of change that I'm not happy with or not involved in. I'm not going to go to Lencioni's model, but I guess just to look at the bottom of that, I mean, once I start to make some changes and I communicate poorly in the organization, I do start to develop that absence of trust and that fear of conflict. So when people start to use power and oppositional behavior, passive aggressive behavior to roll out changes in organizations and what have you, then once I start to damage that absence of trust and I create that fear of conflict, in other words, that ability to have that open, honest conversation as to where we're going, then I lose commitment, I lose accountability, and I don't get the results I'm looking at. And any kind of change in the organization where I'm not involving people into it and I'm starting to demand this or that will start to damage trust, which is actually the bottom of that pyramid. And it just doesn't get any better from there. So how do we achieve successful change? Well, looking at what your change focuses is and actually looking at the efforts you need to put into that. If it's not balanced, then you can't throw something out. I can't go in and play with the structure if I'm not going back and having a look at the assets, technology, or the business processes system, or the management processes. I'm looking at whatever that change focus is and trying to have a measured, balanced forward motion on that based on what's driving in the marketplace. As I said, you're running out and getting the latest technology because that's what you want in your business. If it's not aligned with the marketplace and aligned with the rest of the organization, then you're going to end up with this zero-sum game. In other words, you'll spend something in this area here at the loss of somewhere else, which will give you a zero gain out of the business or out of that change initiative. So change can't be outsourced in a company, even to a change team of HR, which I've said before. You need to think of change these days, and we're all in it together. The focused effort on developing managers, supervisors, and leaders on change and how to lead it is very, very important. HR can support this through employee selection, development, training, and ongoing assessment. So that's where HR can get involved in making sure, as Jim Collins said, getting the right people on the bus. You need to employ and promote people for their ability to engage staff and demonstrate agility and flexibility. In other words, you want to employ either support, develop, or promote people who have a balance of managerial skills and the ability to develop and grow leadership skills as well, building those relationships. We need to move from change from activity to a cultural norm. In other words, it's not an event that's occurring to us, it's something that we're constantly engaging in. So it's evolved from that nice to have to an operational strategic imperative, because if you're not constantly moving forward and looking at ways of which you can improve the way you're delivering your services to the marketplace, someone else will fill that gap. There's absolutely no doubt about that. So in summary, know or find out where you're heading and why. Without a landing strip, you're just another plane in the sky. That all change is personal. Understand this and think of ways to build resilience, engage your team, your teammates, and the leadership is a key component of that. That sometimes change isn't our choice, but at the same time, it can't be ignored. So we can't put our heads in the sand about change in an organization. We really need to be, whether it's our choice or not, finding ways of engaging. That at the heart of every organization transformation is the fact that people do need to think and do things differently. And that is where your leadership can really make a massive difference. The change takes energy and costs money. It requires more effort to change than to say the same, and you need that majority of support to make that change. People tend to, it's easy to work business as usual, and the more pressure I put people under, the more I want business as usual, because trying to solve problems that change occurs is taxing on the brain and taxing the organization. So you need to put the energy and effort in to make that change happen. You can't run an organization transformation on business as usual. I've seen, as I say, senior teams try and push that change initiative down to lower levels of the organization, and then still expect these people to run their departments and operate the organization. That the biggest contributor to success of the transformation is not the process, but the mindset that people have. So you need to be taking that into account in balance as well. And focusing on developing the people that have the highest impact on the mindset of the organization. And that tends to be the leadership team. And therefore, they're impacting positively on the culture. Okay, we lost a couple of people on the way. I've got Chantal and Steve. Did you guys have any questions? I'm wrapping up now. I don't think I've gone too much over time. Thank you very much for your attendance. Did you have anything you wanted to cover off on, or anything? You're certainly welcome to reach out and speak to us at another stage. No, all good. Thanks, Chantal. I appreciate that. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. If we can help you at any stage in the future, please give us a call. As I say, Peter James is my name from Career Life Transitions, and we look forward to seeing you again sometime. All right, you have a fantastic day and all the best. Bye-bye.